Is there a way to gauge the depth or breadth of an awakening experience at Kensho?
Uh, well, I think to some extent there is. I think that that's what I think koans can be extremely valuable in that regard, um, because there's a kind of clarity that one gets through koan work that, I mean, I've just not seen any other way. Uh, and I'm not saying it's not possible because there's certainly plenty of people out there teaching that have, uh, I think, are quite clear people and all that. But I just find koan work to be a very unique kind of practice, very unique. And I think it's that whole notion of testing through koans, not from an egotistical standpoint, but to assist in clarifying and helping people clarify. Uh, I'm not sure I haven't found an alternative for that. Um, I don't personally think it's possible for me to evaluate what someone else's experience has been other than what they tell me. And people have told me about all kinds, and I'm sure every other teacher's experienced people telling them about all kinds of openings that students of theirs or others have experienced through all different methods. Uh, but you know, I actually, talk about Dido. When I was doing a retreat with him once, I had a big, real big, by my standards then, opening, uh, and I talked to him about it, and his way of dealing with it was, all right, so now what? You it's like he totally just. It was hard for me to hear that because I was attached to that experience. I realized it later, but it took me a while. But at the time, it just kind of pissed me off. What, he's not going to acknowledge this big, huge awakening that I had? His way of dealing with it was okay. So, all right, let's work on the next koan.
I was going to say when I first came to Dido, I'd had a couple of openings, and I had one that was to me was really significant. It still feels significant to me today. And
Yeah,
I brought it to him, and he said, "Well, mm, I can't say what that was. I guess it was something enough for you to show me that
yeah,
you're serious about coming here."
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and I'll never forget that interview because I just felt like to this day he just didn't want to acknowledge it, or maybe it wasn't such a big deal. But then my aspiration became huge because I thought, wow, if that opening is nothing,
Yeah.
what is there here 20 years later?
Yeah, I mean,
So let's go.
and that's kind of that was the typical of that day, the typical Zen teacher way of dealing. It's not quite the way I handle it these days. Like if someone comes to me, I say, "Oh yeah, I mean, I can identify with what they've had happen normally. It's in some form or another. It's probably something I've experienced in the past." Uh, but then I do kind of say, I don't just say, "Well, you had nothing happen," and I try and go into the 10 oxherding pictures because I find it a really valuable teaching method. Uh, and and talking to people about what these different pictures represent and how the glimpse of the ox is not the same as riding the ox or oxen self disappearing. In fact, it's not even close, and most people don't have that further experience. But I don't think there's anything wrong with acknowledging they had some kind of experience and treating it as it's valuable, but as we've said before, it's very easy to get attached to those experiences because they're pleasant. They're very pleasant, blissful.
Well, I think there is value, as you say, in that recognition, and that then you can say, well, number one, you can move this as I teach, Mark and I teach, you can move this into the trust basket. You don't need to take it on faith anymore.
Hmm.
So this lets you at least know what we're talking about in this area is real for you based on your experience.
Hmm.
And so building in that way, and then they're willing to trust a little further where they haven't yet reached because they've matched what the teacher has said or the
Hmm.
texts have said. So I think there is some value, at least in our perspective.
Yeah, one of the questions I ask people is, well, what is it that's become awakened? You know, what is it that awakens? We talk about awakening as if it's just this thing. It's not a thing, it's not a state particularly or a thing. And my particular viewpoint on it is that it's the ego that becomes awakened. You know, awakening does not need to awaken, it's already awakened. So it doesn't need to. But ego needs to be awakened as to what its true position is in the universe. And it's not the center of the universe. It's just an ego in the universe, which there's at least billions, we know that, and maybe untold numbers some other places. We don't know for sure. If Star Trek is true, then maybe that's the case. I've always hoped, but I've never seen it yet.